Chapter 207. Babel 2. The Hero and the Saint. Edmund could not fully comprehend the weight that these two titles held. He was a monstrous black wizard who had survived for over 100 years, but he had never met a true hero or saint. A saint, you say? Gavid repeated consideringly. However, the Blade of Incarceration and the Queen of the Night Demons had both met a true hero and a true saint. In that era from 300 years ago, both the hero and the saint were active in the world. Since then, the hero hadn't reappeared, but the Holy Empire of Uruz had appointed a new saint several times and made them the symbol of their holy kingdom. I think there is a possibility, Edmund confirmed. Noir moved with a leisurely gait and sat on top of an empty table. She then crossed her legs with a bewitching smile and said, "The saint candidate for this generation, her name was Christina Rogerus, right? That woman looks just like Anise Slywood, doesn't she? It took those fanatics 200 years, but they finally managed to clone Anise Slywood. We don't know if they have truly succeeded quite yet," Gaved corrected her. After all, they may have simply managed to recreate her face. Though in fact, wouldn't that make it easier for the Holy See to control her? After all, they actually made Anise so well that they couldn't control her in her later years. Noir and Gavid knew the truth about Anise Slywood. These two were demon folk who had lived for hundreds of years and were familiar with the saints who had come before Anise. Although they had been grandiosely called saints, the saints who came before Anise were imperfect creations who could not live up to their name. The same went for the saints who came after Anise as well. It was still unknown what method Uruz used to create the saints, but it seemed that their method of producing saints was imperfect. So far there had been numerous saint candidates and full saints, but among all of them, only Anise deserved to be called a saint. If she's just a crude doll that was made to resemble Anise only in her face, then, hee, Noir finished with a snicker. As you said, it would make it easier for the Holy See to use her. Because just by resembling Anise, she could act as a symbol for their zealotry. But as for the hero, Gavid muttered, still not sitting down. Instead, he stood with his back to the window and stared at Edmund as he gravely said, "Count Edmund, I am also quite appreciative of you. But the word hero isn't something that you should so easily bring up even as a joke, as I hate just hearing that word." "The same goes for me as well," Noir agreed. "The word hero, fufu. Just mentioning it reminds me of Vermouth of Despair." The two still vividly remembered what had happened 300 years ago. Among all of the countless demon folk in Helmuth, these two were considered greater demon folk who held supreme power. The two of them held the titles of Duke, so they were known as the Three Dukes along with Raizakia of the Dragon Demon Castle. After the war ended 300 years ago, Norgiabella and Gavid Lindman became the closest beings to the seat of Helmuth's third demon king. After the war had ended, numerous demon folk had started scrambling to establish a new pecking order while proudly boasting of their battle merits. But not a single person had ever challenged Gavid and Noir. The two of them held a different status than the rest of the demon folk. Even in the most recent territory war between Noir and Iris must have been desperately fighting to win, but to Noir, it was nothing more than light amusement to soothe the boredom of this long peace. The only thing that could make these two monsters sense the possibility of death was the battlefield from 300 years ago, when the great Vermouth of Despair, Hamel of Extermination, Sienna of Calamity, Molin of Terror, Anise of Hell. Only their battle with these 5 individuals, who were so strong that they didn't seem human, could make Gavid and Noir sense the possibility of death. The other high-ranking demons who had lived in that era, who had held a similar status to Gavid and Noir, had all been killed by the 5 of them. Vermouth Lionheart. He literally was despair incarnate. Without even having to bring up the destruction in the shape of a sword that was the Moonlight Sword, Vermouth had made countless demon folk feel despair just by existing. Hamel Dinaz. He was the only one who could stand beside Vermouth and keep pace with him in battle, and in a certain sense he caused the demon folk to feel even more despair than Vermouth. While Vermouth's sword would erase everything, Hamel's sword would flood the battlefield with blood and gore. Sienna Meridian was the embodiment of calamity itself. Her magic would create natural disasters that swept the entire battlefield. In the present, the magic of humans had developed so much that it was even possible for them to compete with the demon folk, but that hadn't been the case 300 years ago. The high-ranking demon folk had always regarded the magic of humans as insignificant and weak. However, Sienna's magic was beyond the understanding of the demon folk. Even in the current era, the reason human magic could now compete with the demon folk was all thanks to Sienna having taken the magic of humans and completely reworking it. Moulin Roar. He was a man who would refuse to retreat no matter how dire the battle got. The human who was more like an undead than the undead. Even if his body was covered in blood and his limbs were blown off, he would always open up a way forward. Then he would penetrate his way into the center of the battlefield and turn the tide of the battle. The sight of him swinging his axe with one arm while his severed arm was held between his teeth had caused countless demon folk to run away in terror. Anise Slywood was called a saint by the humans, but to the demon folk her very existence was a living hell that could move on its own. Just like how black magic could be used to raise the undead, her miracles would forcibly resurrect any dying humans. If they had lost their will to fight through the pain and the fear, her miracles would quell those emotions and forcefully fill them with the energy to keep advancing. Her outstretched wings and the light pouring froth from her would purify any dark power and extinguish the demonfolk's souls. Gavid and Noir were two of the rare few demons who had managed to survive facing those terrible humans. During the final stages of the war, Noir had repeatedly tried to break their spirits by infiltrating their dreams, but she had failed every time and had almost even died several times. Gavid had confronted Hamel and Sienna, who were out conducting reconnaissance, and had engaged them in battle. However, Gavid had actually ended up suffering an almost fatal sword blow from Hamel and had been left with no choice but to retreat. "Do you really think I would say something like this just to upset the two of you?" Edmund asked with a wry smile as he stared at the soul in his hand. This is the soul of a black wizard who had been invited to serve as an expert in magical techniques by the Divine Magic Department of the Holy See in Uras. As your graces may already know, the Department of Divine Magic not only researches the repurposing and creation of miracles, but it also dabbles in black magic. Although there were a lot of black wizards in Arath, most of the black wizards who lived there were members of the Black Tower of Magic. This might be stating the obvious, but the bishops of the Faculty of Divine Magic didn't want anyone to discover that they were inviting black wizards to collaborate in their research. As a result, the bishops had to first search for freelance black wizards who didn't belong to any group, then choose a black wizard from among the countless black wizards in Helmuth known to have both skills and a good reputation. Then after signing a confidentiality contract, they would finally bring him to their Department of Divine Magic. "Were you the one who sent him to infiltrate them?" Gavid asked curiously. "Yes," Edmund confirmed. Even a confidentiality contract could only serve as a guarantee while he was alive. In fact, this wasn't really the case. Usually, even if he died and his soul was harvested, he would still be bound by the contract as he was during his lifetime. However, if it was a black wizard of Edmund's level, they could destroy a soul that was bound by a contract and read their past memories. Edmund revealed, "This guy was killed by the commander of the Knights of the Blood Cross, Raphael Martinex." "Haha, that bratty paladin?" Noir giggled with a smile. Edmund shrugged and continued talking. "According to the memories that I read, it wasn't just this guy. Most priests belonging to the Forbidden Department of the Department of Divine Magic were decapitated by the Crusader's sword. All of the black magic that was being stored away and studied there was also obliterated completely. And so," Gavid prompted, "the Crusader threw the head of Pietro, the chief of the Department of Divine Magic, at their feet. He told them that Pietro's execution was punishment for the crime of blasphemy. All the priests of the Forbidden Department were beheaded for the same crime," Edmund calmly reported. After hearing that even a cardinal had died, Noir's laughter faded away. Gavid's eyes also settled into a freezing cold gaze as he stared at Edmund. "As your graces may be aware, every generation of popes and cardinals have faked being agents of the light by having their stigmata engraved onto their bodies. Even though the cardinal was executed for blasphemy, there have been no announcements from the Vatican. And the saint candidate, Christina Rogerus, was seen observing the situation at the execution site of the members of the Forbidden Department. The circumstances suggest that saint candidate Christina was also present during Pietro's execution," Edmund surmised. Gavid was lost in thought as he stroked his chin. It doesn't seem like Pope Aurius was the one who ordered the execution. "There's another interesting fact," Edmund added with a bright grin. "Eugene Lionheart entered Uras a few days before the executions took place. It's already widely known that the young lion was also accompanied by the saint candidate when he went to Samar." Their search for Sienna Meridian, Noor said with another giggle of laughter. So it seems that the target of their search wasn't the only reason the saint candidate was hanging around him. The holy sword that had been buried in the Lionheart clan's treasure vault must have finally chosen a new owner after 300 years. Indeed, this really is interesting news. So this means that Kid wasn't just entrusted with Akasha by Sienna. He's also the master of the holy sword. Gavid began speaking. In the present, Christina Rogerus is Yura's sole saint candidate. And yesterday was even Anise Slywood's feast day. With Eugene Lionheart also arriving in Yura's at such a time, I don't believe it was a mere coincidence that there would be such an outbreak of bloodshed, starting with Pietro in the Holy See. So what does this mean for us? Noor asked as she turned to look at Gavid with a bright smile. Gavid silently stood there with his back to the window. Seeing such a sight, Noor felt a thrill run down her spine. It had been 300 years since the war ended. Even Gavid Lindman, who was once called the Blade of Incarceration and the Slayer, had been extremely softened by this peace. However, for demon folk, 300 years wasn't necessarily all that long a time frame. The fundamental nature of demon folk would never change. Nevertheless, the era had changed and the Demon King no longer desired a war. So Gavid had simply created a mask that was more suitable for this peaceful era and had disguised himself behind it. And Noor had just seen the mask worn by her old friend and comrade Sheikh. It seems that he really can't be underestimated, Gavid eventually murmured. Crack crack. As his thumb tightened over his index finger, there was the sound of knuckles cracking. From what the people are saying, Eugene Lionheart is so exceptional that he's been called the second coming of Vermouth, Edmund spoke up. I don't know if he really has the raw potential to be compared to Vermouth, but, Fufu, he certainly is exceptional, isn't he? Noor remarked with a giggle. Without even needing to talk about his skill in martial arts, even if it was with a handicap, he was still able to defeat the 8th Circle Green Tower Master in a duel. That's even more reason why we can't underestimate him, insisted Gavid. If even the Holy Sword has recognized the young lion, then he can truly be considered the second coming of Vermouth. So what? Noor asked challengingly. What do you propose to do, Duke Gavid? Will you make a move yourself and step on the head of a young man who's rapidly climbing to the top? Or perhaps you intend to send one of the sword demons in your service. Is that really necessary? Gavid asked with a twisted smile. If he really is a hero who has been recognized by the Holy Sword, if he performs the duty of a hero like his ancestor did, that wouldn't be such a bad thing, right? Noor burst into laughter. Ah. Though of course the Demon King of Incarceration might decide to erase this hero who threatens the oath and the peace it brings, Gavid added cautiously. In fact, in Nahama, the Demon King did warn the young lion and the kingdoms of the continent to be wary of destroying the oath and this era of peace. So if the Demon King of Incarceration does want to preserve this peace, then as his sword, I will gladly take the young lion's throat. However, if he should remain silent. Gavid slowly raised his head to look up at the ceiling. The conference room they were now in was located on the 90th floor of Babel. This entire floor, not just this meeting room, served as Gavid's office. Yet even as a duke, Gavid was restricted from entering the higher floors, starting from the 91st floor as he pleased. The floors from the 91st to the 99th existed solely for the purposes of the Demon King, and it was only possible to ascend to these upper floors when they were summoned by the Demon King of Incarceration. As for me, I will gladly respect whatever decision he makes. And you, Duke Noir, will that satisfy you as well? Gavid addressed Noir seriously. Well, so, Noir muttered with a frustrated sigh. I hope that the young lion doesn't run amok due to the hot-bloodedness of youth. But in order to accomplish what his ancestor failed to do, I hope he does manage to start a war by raising the Holy Sword. Although it's a tragedy for this peace to end, but if war truly does break out, the Demon King of Incarceration will never show the humans the same mercy as he did 300 years ago, Gavid said as his head turned to the side. Edmund, has Eugene Lionheart ever had any interactions with Balzac Ludbeth while he was studying abroad in Arath? You're close friends with Balzac, so I just thought you might have heard some interesting news. I've heard that he was born with a genius talent for wizardry as well. Also, it's said that he hates black wizards to the point where it's almost abnormal, Edmund reported. And what have you heard from Amelia? Gavid asked once more. She said that that brat broke her pet, so one day she's going to tear him to pieces. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to hear the full details of what transpired from her, Edmund confessed. Is that so? Gavid mused, then relaxed his clenched hands and continued speaking. Before deciding on how we should treat Eugene Lionheart, I think it would be worthwhile to take a closer look at him. Moore cocked an eyebrow. You're not intending to head to the Lionheart clan by yourself, are you? I will not, Gavid firmly denied. But I've heard that the nations of the continent intend to unite and hold a festival called the Night March in the Ruhr territory next year. Moore giggled. Hee. But they're not going to allow just anyone to participate, are they? I've heard that as long as they're on the list of approved knightly orders and mercenary companies, they will allow anyone to participate. Of course, the humans intended to limit these qualifications to the countries on their continent, but who knows? If I, the Duke of Helmuth, lead my knightly order to go looking for them, let's see if they dare to chase me out, Gavid snorted. Naturally, Gavid was also aware of the purpose behind organizing this night march. It was all because of the warning that the Demon King of Incarceration had delivered through Eugene Lionheart. But these arrogant and rude humans, instead of heeding the warning and taking care not to cross them, had decided to gather the knights and mercenaries from all over the world to stand in Helmuth's way. How foolishly arrogant, was Gavid's sincere opinion of them. To think that Eugene Lionheart is the hero, foo-foo, Moore chuckled. What kind of expression would Iris make if she knew the truth? That stupid woman. The hero she so resents as having been her father's enemy was right in front of her eyes, but she didn't even recognize him and even failed at taking him hostage. Have you heard the rumors about her? Edmund inquired. Of course I've heard them. They say she's engaging in piracy within Shimuan's territorial waters, right? With a pirate flag of a black skull that has pointy ears sticking out of it, they're plundering trade ships while claiming to be the Pirates of Fury, aren't they? Noir licked her lips as she said this, recalling how Iris had kicked and struggled while she held her down. See, didn't I do well not to kill her? Does that idiot truly believe that by raising funds as a pirate she will really be able to increase her own strength? You seem to be investing a lot of time in her, Edmund responded with a smile. Noir suddenly recalled something. Oh, that's right. You've been interacting with the Coachella tribe in Samar, haven't you? Even they have been victimized by Lady Iris pirate ships several times, Edmund confirmed. In the process, even the elves who were being transported as sacrifices were stolen away. Really? Noir reacted with surprise. Are you saying that Iris piracy isn't entirely pointless? What about your search for the word tree in Siena? Has there been any progress? Unfortunately, there has been no progress, Edmund admitted. Moore just nodded, as expected. Since we couldn't find anything after searching for 200 years, there's no way we would find something at this point. Edmund gave an excuse. There have also been several difficulties that cropped up during the search. It seems that the other great tribes like the Zoran tribe have been strongly suppressing the Coachella. Can't you just get rid of that? Moore said dismissively. How much of a problem can they even be? No matter how many of the natives of the Samar are killed, it won't matter to the peace of the continent. Edmund hesitated. Well, even if it is annoying, it's still at a level that can be ignored. Moore giggled as she stared at Edmund with eyes sparkling like stars. Edmund, though I'm curious to see what it is that you're plotting, I won't ask. If I find out in advance, it won't be as entertaining when the fun actually starts. I'm not actually trying to hide it, but... Edmund trailed off. I know. That's why I've said that I won't ask any more questions, Moore said, waving her hands to silence him as she hopped off the table. More importantly, Duke Gavid, doesn't our loyalty need to increase the number of members as well? The young master of the Dragon Demon Castle isn't in a position to attend our meetings, let alone have the intention to do so. Balzac Ludbeth and Amelia Merwin aren't even in Helmuth either. Are there any nobles who you would like to recommend? Gavid asked her in response. Are you familiar with Count Carrad, the lord of the Rural Fief right next to the Dragon Demon Castle? I've heard that he's a young demon folk with quite decent skills and resourcefulness. What's his race? He's a giant demon who has the mixed blood of the giant. But well, I'll take care of his size so he won't bang his head on the ceiling if he comes here, Moore generously offered. I was wondering why you mentioned his name. You're trying to tempt Count Carrot into invading the territory of the Dragon Demon Castle, aren't you? Gavid asked suspiciously. No way. How could I do that? He's just someone I remember because I thought it was cute to see how much attention and ambition he's showing towards the Dragon Demon Castle, Noor said with a giggle as she walked over to Gavid's side. If not him, then how about Jagan? That maniac killed his own father Oberon by tearing his throat out with his teeth. He might not have any class, but at least his strength is certain, right? If it's Jagan, we can consider making him a member, Gavid agreed. Though that means we'll need to instill some etiquette into him. Your sights really are set far too high, Duke Gavid. Then what about them? Noir asked with a broad smile as she pointed out the glass window. The two men's eyes turned to see the night sky of Pandemonium, where hundreds of airfish were floating around. Slightly below their level, large holographic screens were also floating in the air. Among all these screens, the one that Noir pointed to showed a cutely dressed succubus idol group in the middle of a dance. Noir introduced them. Those are the Dream Girls who've recently debuted under Giabella's celebrity management. In just the first week of their debut, they've already reached the #1 slot in Pandemonium's album sales. They're cute, aren't they? Those are the children I've raised. Gavid kept his silence. Noir tilted her head. Could it be that Duke Gavid prefers sexy over cute? There's also a senior group to theirs that's called the Dream Rose. They're in the 3rd place on Pandemonium's cumulative album sales. Stop, Gavid interrupted her. Perhaps you prefer incubi over succubi? We also have boy groups. I said stop talking. While holding back his distraught emotions, Gavid looked away from the holograms and raised his head. However, through the window the Giabel face was smiling mechanically at him. Ignoring Gavid's request, Noir continued, I'm also thinking of releasing an album. Gavid squeezed his eyes shut, unwilling to keep listening any longer. Chapter 208. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Seal Lionheart glared at the corner of the drill hall with dull eyes. There stood Auxiliary Bishop Christina, who had arrived several days ago as a guest of the Lionheart family. Since the competition against the White Dragon Knights, the Knights of the Black Lion were brimming with motivation and training nearly every single day. While sparring, it was common to hold back one's skills in consideration of the opponent, such that they weren't injured. While this method worked to diminish the injuries, it didn't serve the actual purpose of the spars, to improve one's skills and techniques. Thus, the Knights of the Black Lion held mock battles while allowing the knights to barely skim over their opponents with their weapons. As a result, quite a few knights were injured each day. Although most knights managed to avoid fatal injuries due to their excellent skills, it was pretty common for blades to leave light grazes on the skin. Naturally, the Lionheart family possessed a variety of treatment methods befitting their family name. Even without a high-ranking priest, they had numerous types of potions they provided to their knights, and academically qualified medical staff with a plethora of experience were always on standby to treat anyone. In addition, the Lionheart family made sure to always give large donations to the temple in the capital in case of any emergencies. It ensured that a high-ranking priest could always be mobilized if any accidents occurred that required divine magic. In truth, little cuts did not warrant doctors, priests, or any potions. Those belonging to the Knights of Black Lion were as resilient as they were strong. They would recover from most wounds unless their organs were crushed or their bones were broken. The knights themselves knew this, so they did not care about minor, surface-level injuries. Even so, the same knights were lined up in front of Christina with their extremely minor injuries. It wasn't that Seal failed to understand their train of thought. It wasn't as if the healer was a simple priest. She was the only saint candidate in the Holy Empire of Uraz. If there is only one candidate, couldn't they just call her the Saintess? Whatever the case, she wasn't an ordinary priest. And although none of Lionheart's knights were devout believers baptized in the religion of light, it wasn't as if they were skeptics who doubted the existence of the God of Light. It was undeniable that the God of Light was an existence that granted the believers the power to create miracles and was revered by countless people. Therefore, it was only natural for the knights to want to personally experience the miracle of the Saintess candidate at least once. I don't like it, grumbled Seal. Neither do I, agreed Mare. She fervently licked the lollipop she obtained from Ancilla's room earlier, but her cutting gaze never left Christina. So what exactly did they not like? On the one hand, Mare knew the truth about Christina, so she knew it couldn't be helped. while on the other hand, Seal did not know the truth about Christina. So she wasn't aware that Christina's smile, which looked unshakable, was only a mask and that all her pretense was a result derived from a miserable past. She didn't know what Eugene had been up to in the Holy Empire the last few days, nor did she know anything about the Fount of Light or that inside Christina Rogerus resided the soul of Anise the Faithful from 300 years ago. But there was one thing she did know. Eugene had departed for Uras immediately after receiving a letter. And although she didn't know exactly what he had done there, it just so happened that the most spectacular and magnificent festival celebrating the birth of Anise the Faithful had overlapped with the days of his absence. Also, Eugene had returned with Auxiliary Bishop Christina promptly after the festival ended. And what was the reason he gave? To cure an incurable disease inflicting the elves. Seal liked the elves of the forest and she felt truly sorry for those who were running out of time due to the demonic disease. Hence, it was convincing enough that Christian Rogerus, the auxiliary bishop of Alarut and the sole saintess candidate, was staying at the Lionheart family's main house to treat the elves. However, something about her just didn't appeal to Seal. She noticed that Christina spent her days treating the knights when they had finished their training, then headed straight into the forest at sunset. Was it really to treat the elves? It certainly looked like it, but, strangely enough, Seal saw Christina spending more time with Eugene than with the elves. It wasn't as though the two were doing something special together. From her time observing the two people, Seal noticed that when Eugene was meditating in the middle of the forest, Christina would sit a few steps away and stare at Eugene with a faint smile. That was all. Even when Eugene finished meditating and proceeded to train his body, Christina would watch from a distance so she wouldn't interfere with his training, but still with the same faint smile. Seal glared at Christina in the distance with squinting eyes. Christina had a faint smile as she treated the knights with divine magic. However, her smile differed from the one that hung on her lips when she was with Eugene in the forest. Christina's smile was definitely different from when she ran into Eugene earlier in the hallway of the mansion, when she greeted him saying, "Sir Eugene, do you have anything special planned for today?" And when she asked, "Sir Eugene, why don't we eat together today?" Her current smile was also different from when she asked, "Sir Eugene, how did you sleep? What will you do for breakfast?" At the family table with the rest of the Lionheart family? Then I guess I will have to sit at a different table. Please eat with me next time. You stupid pig. Thus began Seal's curses. 4 people were seated in the spacious office of the family head: Gilead Lionheart, Guillaume Lionheart, Carmen Lionheart and Eugene Lionheart. Of the 3 seated across Eugene, Guillaume looked the most shocked. It took him quite some time to realize that his jaw was practically touching the floor as he stared in astonishment, and when he did come to the realization he promptly closed his mouth. He then took a moment to digest what he had just heard. It wasn't that he failed to comprehend the literal words, but it was hard for him to fully understand. Ha ha ha. So Guillaume chose to laugh instead. He laughed briefly then shrugged with a sigh. "This makes me look crummy," said Guillaume. He was born the youngest of 3 brothers. The eldest brother had cared for his younger brothers since childhood, and he was born with the character and qualities suitable for the eldest son. His second brother was warm and generous. He neither possessed the ambition to compete with his older brother nor the characteristics that qualified him to do so. The youngest brother, Guillaume, was born with all his brother's advantageous and disadvantageous qualities. He was endowed with talent sufficient to compete with his eldest brother, and he was a man of unblemished character. Simultaneously, he was humble and generous. In short, he was a genius. Just like Gilead, Guillaume had been praised as a genius since he was a young child, though he never acted arrogant. Moreover, after forfeiting his claim to the spot of the family head, he was given the opportunity to live freely. So he wielded his sword as he wished, wandering around many different countries. He first swung a sword at the age of 7, and after training for 30 years he barely managed to reach the 6th star of the White Flame formula. It was similar for Gilead and Carmen as well. Both had dedicated a good portion of their lives to the sword. When you suddenly called for me, I naturally assumed it was to celebrate me becoming the captain of the 5th division, said Guillaume. That is definitely something to celebrate, Guillaume, but it was only a matter of course. It wasn't a surprise either, answered Carmen with a dry cigar in her mouth. The thick cigar hung at an exquisite angle on Carmen's lips, neither too tilted nor pronounced. Now this was a truly remarkable feat, thought Eugene. Gilead chimed in. However, it's certainly surprising that he managed to reach the 6th star of the white flame formula at the age of 20. You say 20, said Guillaume while shaking his head with a flabbergasted expression. Eugene has only been training in the white flame formula for 7 years. Even now he still remembered the events as clearly as daylight. After the bloodline continuation ceremony, when Eugene was adopted into the main family, Guillaume had guided Eugene to the ley line deep within the forest. Eugene first resonated with mana there and was guided in the white flame formula. Who could believe it? 13 years old was already slightly late to learn to control mana. Even though the ley line's mana was incredibly dense, Eugene had immediately sensed mana upon sitting down and succeeded in manipulating it. Then, as soon as he was taught the white flame formula by Guillaume, he succeeded in wielding it without any help. I thought everyone was well aware that he's a monstrous genius, snorted Carmen while placing down her cigar. She and Gilead had been informed of Eugene's accomplishment a few days ago. She had been sufficiently surprised then, so she could maintain her composure now. Of course, but it's still hard to believe, responded Guillaume before clearing his throat. Presently there were only 3 people in the Lionheart family who had managed to reach the 6th star of the white flame formula. The family head, Gilead, the captain of the 5th division of the Black Lion Knights, Guillaume, and Eugene. Carmen was the only one who had broken through the ceiling and reached the 7th star. The entry to the 6th star of the white flame formula was an incredibly difficult feat. Even Klein, Carmen's younger brother and elder of the family, was stuck at 5 stars. Have you already explained the changes that come after reaching the 6th star? Yes, answered Gilead in a calm voice before raising his head. Whoosh! A white flame enveloped Gilead's body. He operated the white flame formula and directed the flame with the tip of his finger. However, the appearance of the flame was slightly different from what was commonly seen with the white flame formula. The tip of the flickering flame was sharp like an awl, but it also flared like a curved blade. The white flame formula underwent a tremendous change after the 6th star. Just as Eugene had guessed, the white flame formula synchronized with one's numerous experiences and battles. No, to be more precise, the white flame formula assimilated with the user himself. Gilead's white flame formula gave off the appearance of many blades surrounding his body rather than actual flames. Although the flames were created from mana that was refined to the limit, as soon as Gilead willed it, the sharp flame would immediately transform into blades of white flame. This is wholly my own flame, muttered Gilead with a bitter grin. Come to think of it, Eugene had never been taught anything special or grandiose by Gilead. The same was true for Cyan and Seal. Although Carmen always took Seal around and watched over her training, she had never taught her any special skills. The only thing the seniors taught the children in terms of being a Lionheart was the white flame formula. Although the children were taught how to utilize their weapons, how to fight, and many other things, such lessons could be learned from outside the Lionheart family as well. Eugene was taught the secret art of the empty sword by Alchester, someone from outside the family. Unfortunately, however, the Lionheart family had no such secret arts. It can't be helped, Guillaume said with a sigh before activating his own white flame formula. His flame possessed the opposite temperament to Gilead. If Gilead's flame was a sharp blade, Guillaume's flame felt like a flowing wave. The flame was clearly optimized only for Guillaume and incorporated his tendencies and habits. To put it really simply, they were all changing the nature of the mana that was forming their flame. It was possible for Eugene to imitate their flames, but even he could not replicate the possibilities contained within their flames. Thus, the Lionheart family couldn't possess a special art or a technique like the empty sword. The sword will always reflect the nature of its wielder. The white flame formula melts and integrates one's nature into the flame. When one reaches the 6th star, their flame will change accordingly. But if anyone becomes aware of this truth before they reach the 6th star, they will be conscious of this fact from a young age. It cannot be said to be unconditionally bad, but one may end up insisting on clothes that don't fit their body while pursuing false images of themselves, continued Carmen, striking the air with her gloved fist. Her flame wasn't big, but the mana that constituted her flame was incredibly dense. It was clear that the power contained within her flame was much greater than what appeared on the surface. That is why the truth is hidden. It allows one to pursue their own art while growing stronger without being conscious of it. Eugene silently watched the flames of the 3 people for a while, then activated his own white flame formula. The stars in his heart started to spin and his flames spurred fiercely. However, his flame was much bigger and brighter than the flames of the three. At the same time, it threatened to devour anyone who dared to venture too close to it. As expected, commented Guillaume with a bitter smile. Fwoosh. He extinguished his own flame before shaking his head. Now I understand why you summoned me as well, brother. It's impossible to eyeball it, murmured Carmen. Eugene extinguished his own flame as well while listening to their conversation. I haven't really heard all the details yet, said Eugene. He had been half expecting them to throw a celebratory party now that he reached the 6th star. Still, after hearing the news and seeing his flame, Gilead and Carmen revealed an unprovoked tension instead of celebrating. Do you know about the basement of the main house? Asked Gilead. Yes. There's a food storage in the basement, right? The servants' quarters are also there, and deeper down is the treasure room, Eugene answered. Even deeper than that? Asked Gilead. It was difficult for Eugene to understand what he was talking about. As such, he remained silent while staring at Gilead. After a while, Gilead continued. In the deep underground of the main house, there is a room known as the Dark Room. The Dark Room? Asked Eugene. Like the ley line of the forest, it is a legacy left by the great founder for future generations. It is also one of the reasons why the direct line had to stay in the same location for 300 years, said Gilead. To put it simply, it's like this, Carmen interrupted Gilead and continued on his behalf. Eugene Lionheart. Yes, he answered. Today you must destroy a world, she said. What? To be born anew. Was this conversation really necessary? Eugene seriously pondered. Wasn't Carmen just talking to herself? But that didn't seem to be the case, judging by the solemn expressions on Gilead and Guillaume's faces. So, I will break a mirror, or an egg? Asked Eugene. What on earth are you talking about? This is not the time to be joking around, Carmen rebuked Eugene with a grave expression. Motherf. This novel is available on bit.ly/3ibfjv. Eugene's eyebrows immediately scrunched up with irritation. There's nothing to think hard about, said Carmen before raising her finger toward Eugene. You will enter the dark room, reflect on yourself, kill yourself and be born anew. What was there not to think hard about? Eugene couldn't understand what Carmen was saying at all. Chapter 209, The Dark Room, 2. Located in the deep underground of the Lionheart mansion was a secret room open only to descendants of the Lionheart family who had reached the 6th star of the white flame formula. It was a place known as the Dark Room. Carmen had called it a place to destroy a world, to reflect on oneself, and to be born anew after killing oneself. Eugene had to wonder what kind of nonsense she was spouting, but he came to a better understanding after hearing Guillaume and Gilead's following words. Are you saying this is a place where I face my apparition? Asked Eugene. To put it simply, yes, answered Guillaume, scratching his chin. Though I don't know if it's appropriate to call it an apparition. It's like looking in the mirror, right? Well, I don't think it was quite the same as looking at a mirror. In a sense, the phantom I faced in the dark room was ahead of me. Guillaume, Carmen, and Gilead all gave slightly different explanations since what one saw in the dark room was purely dependent on oneself. Even their appearance was different. So even though the projection was my own, I didn't necessarily think it was me of the present moment. They felt immature at first, muttered Gilead. But that was only true at the beginning. Once you begin to understand your opponent and attempt to cross blades with them, the undeveloped version of me in the darkroom changes. It changes to the current version of yourself, followed by an improved version. But that's not only true for warriors, Carmen said while crossing her legs and grabbing the cigar between her fingers. No matter how good a person is at objectifying him or herself, everyone imagines an ideal version of themselves. Someone who is slightly faster and slightly stronger. Someone capable of doing something impossible for your current self. The dark room projected the ideal self. Although it didn't imbue anyone with any actual significant changes, it would project a superior version of oneself. The dark room is a place where you face such a version of yourself to train. In a way, it's a very harsh place, said Gilead with a wry smile before looking back at Carmen. Neither Guillaume nor I succeeded in overcoming the ordeal of the dark room at first. As a result, we ended up causing a lot of trouble for Lady Carmen and the elder of the former generation. If one fell to the phantom of the dark room, their body would be taken over by the phantom. However, the phantom possessed no ego, nor would one lose control of their body for life. According to previous cases, the phantom would only have possession of one's body for half a day at most. However, losing control of one's body for half a day could still result in catastrophic results, so it was required for those who had already overcome the trial of the dark room to keep watch at the entrance. It was pretty tough back then, and I think it'll be even worse this time around, said Carmen. It was understandable. Gilead, Guillaume and Carmen were well aware of Eugene's strength. He couldn't be thought of only in terms of the white flame formula. The image of Eugene fighting against Iris was still vivid in Carmen's memories. Guillaume and Gilead also knew well how powerful Eugene was. They had seen Eugene since he was young and had acknowledged from the bottom of their hearts that Eugene might even exceed them in some ways. Moreover, now that he had reached the 6th star of the white flame formula, if by chance Eugene lost to his phantom, it would be an arduous task to subdue him. An ideal version of me, whispered Eugene before sinking deep into thought. Indeed, the phantom of the dark room presented a troubling issue for Eugene as well. It was very simple for Eugene to imagine an ideal version of himself. Since he had memories of his past life, he knew he had yet to catch up to his past as Hamel, though he was quickly growing stronger after being reborn. Can I beat it? He contemplated it with only logic and reason. If I use ignition and the empty sword for a moment, I should be able to overpower it since this body is capable of handling their use. However, if I fail to win at that moment, then I will lose. After coming to a conclusion, Eugene raised his head. Can I bring in weapons? He asked. No, Carmen answered immediately. You will enter the dark room with your bare body, but you won't need to worry about not having a weapon. The moment your phantom appears, your weapons will already be in your hands. He had been hoping to cover his shortfall with the weapons he had never possessed in his past life, but it had been a futile thought. What if I conjure up a version of myself so strong that it's impossible for me to win? Asked Eugene. The great founder has left us, his descendants, with an ordeal that is definitely possible to overcome, answered Carmen. She secretly winked at Eugene before continuing. I imagine myself as a dragon before entering the dark room, but I didn't actually come to face a dragon. The phantom I saw then was just slightly stronger than I was back then. It made sense. If the phantom was as strong as one's imagination, it would definitely be impossible to overcome for some. Eugene noticed that Carmen had emphasized the word dragon and continued to wink at him, but he simply ignored her. And you don't only come to face your phantom in the dark room, said Gilead with a smirk. I've yet to come that close to dying, but once you enter the dark room, what you experience before you face your phantom? I think it is similar to how your life might flash before your eyes before you die. How your life might flash before you? Asked Eugene in confusion. That's right. The things you experienced while living as a man will flash before your eyes. Perhaps that is also the magic of the great founder. Your phantom emerges from the past you have experienced, Gilead explained in more detail. The great Vermouth had been both a brilliant warrior and a distinguished wizard. In some ways, his magic had been on par with Sienna, and even Sienna had recognized this fact. What happens if I defeat the phantom? Asked Eugene. The white flame formula will change, muttered Guillaume. Not to say that your current white flame formula is unstable, but once you defeat your phantom in the dark room, you should feel a remarkable change. But none of the three could give an exact explanation of the changes Eugene would undergo with his white flame formula. The 6th star of the white flame formula formed a flame that was different from before, a flame that was completely tailored to oneself. It was impossible to imagine what kind of changes the flame would bring after overcoming the dark room. I understand, said Eugene before standing up. I have nothing else to prepare. In that case, may I head there right now? It sure is good to be young, commented Guillaume before following suit. If you happen to lose, I will definitely make sure to stop you, so don't worry too much. Even if you lose, you can try again until you win. Well, as long as you don't become disheartened and lose the will to fight along the way, said Carmen while stealing a glance at Guillaume. Guillaume cleared his throat with an embarrassed expression before responding. But it's definitely possible to be disheartened if you find yourself helpless against your opponent. The more familiar you are with victory and are far from defeat, the easier it is to break your heart. Eugene the Blood Lion, that's why I am slightly worried about you. You are a genius ignorant of defeat since a young age, said Carmen, Can I be honest with you? I feel more bothered that you call me the Blood Lion than defeat Lady Carmen, responded Eugene. How come? Don't you feel more motivated? I didn't have a cool nickname like that when I was your age. Of course, now I'm known as the Silver Lion, which is much, much cooler than Blood Lion, said Carmen with a satisfied smile. She looked genuinely proud of her nickname. Eugene disregarded her and took off the cloak of darkness. He contemplated for a moment whether it would be better to let Mare or Christina know before heading to the dark room, but he didn't come to find it necessary. He didn't know how long it would take for him to overcome the dark room. Eugene wasn't arrogant. He didn't dare assume he would clear the dark room in a single attempt. It's good that it doesn't matter how many times I fail. It means that I can attempt it over and over again. He had no idea how the trial would change the white flame formula, but apart from that, Eugene liked the idea of reflecting and overcoming himself. The phantom he would come to face in the dark room would be stronger than his current self, but not to an absurd degree. Carmen had imagined herself as a dragon, but she had not faced such a creature. As such, Eugene imagined that the phantom was a realization of a possibility. In other words, it was probable that the phantom would be himself in the future, a form embodying the possibilities and ideals derived from his current self. Eugene's heart fluttered at the thought of facing such an opponent, even if it was simply an illusion. Perhaps. Why had Vermouth created such a bothersome thing for his descendants? Was it to train future generations? Perhaps, but... No, Eugene stopped himself from thinking useless things. Gilead, Guion and Carmen took the lead and headed to the treasure vault underground. Eugene followed them while holding his cloak. It was the first time he was visiting the treasure vault since he pulled out the holy sword. Once the lion on the doorknob of the room devoured Gilead's blood, the door opened. The weapons that Vermouth once used were no longer here. The holy sword Altair, the storm sword Wnd, the devouring sword Asphalt Thunderbolt Pernoa, and the dragon spear Carbos were with Eugene, while Geddon's shield was with Cyan and the phantom rain sword Javel with Seal. Deep inside the treasure room was a large blank canvas in an antique frame. The canvas was as big as a person, and Gilead stopped once he arrived in front of it. "Show your respect," said Gilead before taking out the seal of the family head from his inner pocket. Eugene looked around with a puzzled expression, but he followed suit once he saw Carmen and Guion bow after getting on one knee. Finally, Gilead went down on one knee as well. He had the seal carefully cupped in both hands and brought it closer to the canvas. Suddenly, the white canvas began to ripple. Delicate lines started appearing on the blank page and colors bloomed as well. Soon, they were kneeling in front of a portrait of the great Vermouth, the founder of the Lionheart clan. The drawing was quite familiar to Eugene. During his childhood, he had seen similar portraits in his parents' house in the Jadal mansion. This was the original, a portrait of Vermouth first painted 300 years ago. It was protected with magic to prevent the colors from fading, but apart from that, the original painting exuded a different atmosphere compared to the copies. It was graceful. Eugene gazed at the portrait in a daze. It was the same portrait he had seen many times since he was young. Vermouth's face was no different from the memories of his previous life, and his expression and emotions were portrayed the same as well. However, the original portrait presented Eugene with a stronger sense of recollection of Vermouth from his past life. "The door to the dark room is connected to this portrait," said Gilead before carefully placing the seal on the portrait. Whoosh! Vermouth's portrait suddenly disappeared, and a painting of a stairway leading to the basement took its place. After confirming the change, Gilead stood up and stretched his feet towards the canvas. Although the stairway existed inside the canvas, it wasn't actually a painting. Gilead started making his way down the steps of the canvas, and the other two followed behind him. Eugene belatedly stood up before walking into the canvas. Completely ridiculous. A fucking monster, Eugene genuinely thought. He reached into the cloak and grabbed Akasha, but this space magic made absolutely no sense even then. No, in the first place, was this truly magic? He could understand that it was a world created by isolating space, but... is this truly magic? He headed down the dark stairs. Although he could see through the dark in most cases, this wasn't one such time. Although he was holding Akasha, he could not see the magic that formed this space, or rather this world. Eugene had studied most of the magic books in the Hall of Space in Akron. The authors of the books had all been renowned masters of space magic in their own era, But he did not recall any magic even remotely similar to what he was seeing now. Was it perhaps just magic on a higher level? Or perhaps it was something else entirely? He could not figure it out, but there was one thing Eugene was confident about. No archwizard could possibly comprehend this space with magic. Eugene was also a wizard, and although he wasn't quite at the level of an archwizard, he dared to define this world with his knowledge. This wasn't magic. "This is as far as we can go," said Gilead. After climbing down the stairway for a while, the group of 4 had arrived at the bottom. On the far side of the darkness was a door with a subtle glow. He continued as he pointed at the door. "Open that door and walk along the road. You will eventually reach a place riddled with complex magic circles. You won't need to sit down. The moment you get there, the dark room will show you," said Guillaume before patting Eugene on the shoulder. "Again, it's fine to lose. Rather, it would be strange not to suffer a single defeat. To be honest, I feel the same way as Lady Carmen. You're not used to being defeated, so—" "No," said Eugene while shaking his head with a smile. He placed his cloak on the floor. "I've been defeated many times, so I'm familiar with it." "What?" Guillaume wasn't sure about what Eugene said out of the blue. "It's not just well known," Eugene replied with a shrug. Hamel Dynas, not Eugen Lionheart, had suffered countless defeats, and most of them were at the hands of Vermouth. Being discouraged by defeat? What was there to say? He had been discouraged as much as his many defeats, but he had simply dusted himself and stood up again. So Eugene strode forward without hesitation. After crossing the darkness, he arrived at the door, which opened on its own to welcome Eugene. When he took a step forward, the world changed. The door had opened the way to a seemingly impenetrable darkness, but once he walked in, a bright space greeted him. To be more precise, it was a white space, an area where nothing existed. This space somewhat resembled Vermouth's tomb in the Black Lion Castle. However, Eugene could see nothing like the temple that existed in the tomb. "I thought this was supposed to be a dark room," muttered Eugene. The space outside the door had been dark enough to befit the name, but this place was completely white. However, the whiteness of the space made him feel even more out of place. The mana in Eugene's core fluctuated violently contrary to Eugene's will, so he quenched it before walking through the dark room. Then he saw the magic circle that Gilead mentioned. It was a complicated array of strange patterns on the floor. Eugene stared at the magic circle before he walked in. It looked as if the letters and symbols belonged to an ancient language, but unfortunately he could not decipher the magic circle. In fact, he couldn't even read any of it. "Where the hell did you learn this kind of magic?" Eugene gave up trying to read the magic circle and walked inside. Contrary to his expectations, however, nothing happened. There was no activation of magic even though he had walked into the circle. "What the hell?" grumbled Eugene while continuing forward straight out of the magic circle. The moment his foot left the circle, Eugene felt slightly dizzy. Huh. He looked ahead as he stood fixated in his spot. He saw a boy he knew well. The boy wore sandbags that weighed more than himself and even wore heavy armor while swinging a long spear. It was Eugene from the past. But that was only the beginning. After that, the past of Eugene Lionheart started to unfold in front of his eyes. He grabbed WNYD. He lit the spark of mana for the first time in his body. He studied magic in Arath. He drew light from the moonlight sword in a desert tomb. He drew the holy sword from the treasure vault of the Lionheart family's main house. Eugene watched as the events played out one after another. The boy became a young man with the current of time, and the appearance of the young man, his current self, scattered and disappeared. What greeted him afterward was a scene of his previous life, the death of Hamel. Eugene watched with an expressionless face as Hamel died with a gaping hole in his chest. Time started flowing backward from the end. The life of Hamel was longer than Eugene's, and although Eugene had not yet met an end, Hamel's life was given both a beginning and an end. Eugene was shown many things starting with his own death. It was a life he missed but could never return to. He saw many things, including Hamel at his prime, during his immature days, when he worked as a mercenary before becoming Vermouth's companion, and times far before that when he was much more immature and weaker. A boy from a small village came to hate demons after losing everything. He did not want to live idly like the many other orphans who kept a low profile while living their pathetic lives. He never possessed a grand sense of justice. Rather, he wanted to pay back the demons in the exact same way they had taken from him. It was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So the boy grasped a dull blade and became a mercenary with a single goal in mind. Finally, even the boy disappeared. Is it starting now? The ideal version of himself would now appear as a phantom, and the phantom would be stronger than him. Eugene prepared himself for the trial and corrected his posture. He felt nothing in his grasp yet, and he saw no phantom. However, it would come soon. What's this? Suddenly the space became distorted. Eugene felt the space around him twist, then felt something starting to permeate the void of the white space. There was a smell of blood. He saw a man staggering through a battlefield littered with hundreds, thousands, no, even more corpses than that. The man had been walking for a while already, and the only thing Eugene could see was his drooping shoulders in the distance. The scene changed once more, but the stench of blood remained. However, the man was no longer stumbling across the battlefield anymore. Instead, he sat on top of a mountain formed from corpses. A sword stained with flesh and blood lay on his shoulder. But even now, Eugene could not see the man's face. The man was sitting with his back to Eugene, staring at a battlefield located in the far distance. Who is this? Eugene looked up at the man with surprise. Although he couldn't be sure, it was entirely possible that the man sitting on the mountain of corpses was the same man who had been staggering on the battlefield. Perhaps Eugene could see his face if he got closer. He felt his necklace burn. Whoosh! A strong, sudden gust of wind swept everything away. Eugene stared ahead while pressing down on his hair. He could no longer see the corpse-ridden battlefield or the man. However, there were countless weapons. Weapons that Eugene had used since his previous life were strewn, stabbing into the ground. Before he knew it, a common long sword was in his hand. What? It wasn't just the weapons that appeared.